Pennsylvania's rolling hills and river valleys look tranquil, but the ground here keeps older secrets than any colonial chronicle. Beneath the forests and farmland lie traces of vanished peoples, cryptic carvings, sealed tunnels, and legends that refuse to sit quietly in the past. Follow the state's backroads, and you'll find a rock shelter that bends the timeline of human arrival, a furnace whose underworld remains unexplained, riverside petroglyphs that speak in symbols rather than dates, a mountain lion that prowls the border between myth and memory, and a fort so famous in rumor it vanished from the map. Prehistoric forts, water-worn glyphs, even whispers of giant bones, this is the Keystone State at its most enigmatic. What you're about to see doesn't just recount history, it asks you to revise it. Because here, every hillside is a page, every stone a sentence, and every unanswered question, an invitation to look deeper. Follow the back roads toward Cross Creek, and you'll pass a quiet slope. Most drivers forget the instant it's behind them until you step under the sandstone overhang and the ground begins to speak. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter looks like a simple alcove scissored from a hillside, but its sandy floor is a stack of human seasons layered so tightly that time turns into sediment. The story opens in 1955, when Albert Miller, a local farmer with a patient eye, noticed a small hole half hidden by brush. He reached into the earth and felt edges, stone tools, pottery sherds, clues that didn't fit on any tourist map. He didn't bulldoze or scatter, he waited. 2 decades later, a University of Pittsburgh team came with trowels, brushes, and the kind of care that turns dirt into data. What they uncovered challenged everything we thought we knew about the first footsteps in North America. Layer by layer, the shelter yielded fire pits, animal bone, stone flakes, even fibers twisted by hands that never learned the word Pennsylvania. The stratigraphy lay clean and orderly, sediment sealing each moment like pages pressed in a book. When the radiocarbon counts came back, charcoal flecks whispering dates near 16,000 years, the numbers hit like thunder. That was older than the famous Clovis horizon long used as the continent's starting pistol. If the ages held, then people were here before the last ice loosened its grip, cooking, flaking tools, and watching the seasons turn beside a creek that still runs today. Skepticism arrived promptly, as it should. Some argued that ancient carbon from coal seams might have slithered into younger layers, or that burrowing animals mixed the deck, but the sediments were tight and stable, undisturbed except by the hands that had lived there. Multiple labs replicated the dates, hearth stains sat where they should sit, artifacts nested in proper order rather than in a jumble. Over time, the objections lost oxygen, and what remained was a stark possibility. Pennsylvania hosted people thousands of years before Clovis points glittered on the plains. Who were they? Their tools at Meadowcroft don't match the signature fluted spear points of later Clovis makers. These pieces are smaller, more refined, produced with a different rhythm, pressure, patience, precision. They hunted deer and small game, cast lines or nets into swollen spring water, gathered nuts and wild fruit when the trees grew heavy. Bone splinters show they wasted little. Blackened rock on the ceiling records smoke the way film records light. You can almost see winter families curled near embers, listening to the creek as ice forms its delicate architecture along the banks. In spring, the valley blooms, and the rock shelter becomes a windbreak and a schoolroom. Here's how to nap. Here's how to snare. Here's how to last. The upper layers tell a longer tale of return. People came back for millennia, 10,000 years and more, leaving shifts in toolkits, pottery fragments, and eventually trade goods from a world that would not have made sense to the first families here. Meadowcroft doesn't just shout old, it murmurs continuous. A single address kept in the family far beyond any one lifetime, and the implications spill well beyond the alcove. If people sat by these fires 16,000 years ago, then the tidy storyboard of a late Bering land bridge migration wobbles. Perhaps travelers slipped down a kelp-fringed Pacific corridor before the ice unclenched. Perhaps there were multiple pulses of movement, some now lost to silence. Meadowcroft won't name the route, but it insists we redraw the timeline. Visit today and the shelter rests beneath a protective roof, walkways tracing the cuts where centuries are stacked like cordwood. Guides point to charcoal specks and hearth stains, while a breeze moves through the trees with an old sound. For many, the place feels less like a ruin than a memory, a question mark in stone asking how early, how often, and how human curiosity found its way here, to this perfect fold of rock and water. In Cornwall, Pennsylvania, industry rose from the earth, and then sank back into rumor. The Cornwall Iron Furnace still stands with its tall stone walls and iron-latched gates, a time capsule from the mid-1700s when Peter Grubb fired the stacks in 1742, and the nation to be demanded cannonballs, tools, and rails. On the surface, The site is a masterclass in early American iron-making charcoal houses, casting rooms, the blackened geometry of labor preserved so carefully that you can almost hear the rhythm of bellows and ladles. But the conversations that echo loudest here are the ones you can't follow on a tour. They travel up from below, from a hidden web of tunnels that most maps ignore and most memories can't quite agree upon. The story of those passages begins by accident in the late 1800s, when the ground broke open near an older section of the works and revealed a narrow corridor of dressed stone angling into darkness. Miners braced for ventilation shafts or drainage cuts, practical arteries you'd expect beneath a furnace, but the deeper they crept, the less practical it felt. The walls were too precise, the angles too deliberate, the dead ends smoothed as though completed rather than abandoned. Over years, more mouths to the underworld appeared, some beneath the foundry, some veering toward the hills, a few tethered to old ore pits, and others simply insisting on their own logic. By the 1960 seconds, archaeologists and state historians tried to translate that logic. Surveys suggested a pattern like spokes radiating from a hub beneath the main stack. It sounded almost diagrammatic, as if the tunnels were laid out to illustrate an idea rather than to move air or water. Attempts to chase the lines met the stubborn realities of time: collapsed roofs, flooded rooms, and walls that seemed to fold in on deeper chambers. Ground-penetrating radar later hinted at hollows sunk far below anything an 18th-century ironmaster would have found practical, adding depth to the riddle instead of solving it. Explanations have multiplied like echoes. Some insist we're looking at primitive ventilation, a buried lung system for the furnace. Others point to a secret ore handling experiment, perhaps a transport network that failed after a collapse or a change in technology. But the oldest, lowest sections complicate the engineering story. In tight pools of lantern light, explorers described rounded chambers with niches cut into the stone and placements that make little industrial sense. Those details feed a different lineage of speculation, that before Grubb's empire, the land's first miners, native peoples who gathered hematite and magnetite for pigments and tools, left ritual spaces, passages that were more ceremony than conduit. Folklore, as always, rushes to fill the gaps. Early workers told of spirit fires in the mines. Teenagers later dared each other through sealed grates and drainage mouths, returning with breathless talk of cold drafts that moved like living things, of faint hammering after midnight. Strange markings, spirals, triangles, wayward symbols have been noted and debated as miners' signs, graffiti, or something older entirely. The furnace's modern caretakers, charged with safety, sealed most entrances as the site became a state landmark in the 1970 seconds. The result is a paradox. The better the surface is preserved, the more the depths insist on mystery. Stand on the casting room floor when the air is damp and the iron smell blooms from the stone. Your own footsteps parcel the silence into notes. Beneath you, the spokes and chambers wait either the bones of an unfinished machine, the remnants of a tradition older than the furnace, or both layered together, history building right atop history. New technology might one day diagram the entire network and flatten the speculation into a plan. Or perhaps we'll keep the best kind of map, the one where a blank space is labeled with a question. Between industry and myth, these tunnels remain the state's most stubborn corridor leading, for now, to wonder. High above the Susquehanna near Columbia, a dark rib of quartzite shoulders out of the hills. Locals call it Chickies Rock, after an old Lenape word often translated as place of the crayfish, and on most evenings it's a postcard. Families chasing the sunset, climbers testing their reach, the river unwinding in broad metallic loops below. But drop down toward the waterline when the river is low and the mood changes. There, where stone meets current, you find the quietest archive in Pennsylvania: petroglyphs shallowly pecked into bedrock, messages written to last precisely as long as the river will allow. The marks seem modest at first glance: circles with radiating rays, spirals, open hands, animal tracks, stick-limbed figures that look like dancers caught mid-step. Some hide behind veils of moss and lichen. Others spend half their year drowned by fluctuating levels. 19th century farmers and fishermen noted them. By the early 1900s, surveyors recorded dozens along a 15-mile reach between Safe Harbor and Columbia. Chickies Rock emerged as a crown among these clusters, not because its carvings are the grandest, but because they keep talking no matter how hard weather tries to silence them. Dating them is like trying to date the river's voice. Stone holds no carbon for lab clocks, and so scholars triangulate. Stylistic echoes, superposition where one carving crosses another, the ethnographic memory of peoples like the Susquehanna who saw the river as sacred and the threshold between worlds as charged. Many archaeologists argue the panels belong to ritual petitions, prayers, maps of memory in a language of hands, suns, and tracks. Imagine a shaman working at dawn when the water is glass, marking stone to converse with things that move like weather, game, seasons, spirits. The river does not simply reflect the sky, it answers. And yet Chickies Rock refuses to be tidy. Early surveyors also sketched angular crosses and boat-like shapes that don't sit comfortably within local motifs. Fringe theories pounced Vikings, Celts, visitors from across the sea, chiseling proof of passage into Pennsylvania bedrock. The better answer is likely the quieter one, that rivers accumulate symbols the way they collect driftwood, and centuries of hands can complicate any wall. Archaeologists acknowledge the outliers without letting them steer the boat. Evidence matters, and here the evidence speaks of native makers whose traditions stitched belief to water and stone. Time has done its own editing. Dams shifted levels, submerging some panels entirely. Ice scours and summer feet wear at edges. Vandalism scarred a few figures beyond recognition. In the 1,970 seconds, crews traced and photographed every visible carving along this stretch, preserving delicate negatives of a language we still don't read. Those tracings now rest at the State Museum in Harrisburg, a second river where symbols flow across paper. Meanwhile, the rock continues its slow conversation with rain and light. Among Chickies Rock's most haunting scenes is the so-called Council Rock, human-like forms arranged around a central circle as if gathered to listen. Is it a ritual? A map of village ties? A story told in silhouettes? No caption survives, and maybe that's the point. Linked with other petroglyph clusters downriver Bald Friar, Safe Harbor, the site feels less like a single inscription than part of a corridor, a liturgy laid out in stone from bend to bend. Today, the park protects what it can. Guided walks during low water show safe vantage points. Researchers discuss 3D scanning to capture every line before the river edits again. But some power depends on risk. To stand where the glyphs breathe in mist, to watch the same current that once carried canoes and prayers comb its fingers over the carvings, is to feel history choose metaphor over footnote. We don't fully understand the message. We understand that someone needed to say it here, where the river hears. Head northeast into Center County and the landscape gathers itself into a long, forested ridge that watches the valley like a quiet sentry. Mount Nittany's silhouette is so constant that people stop seeing it until a story wakes it up. Long before Penn State lit its stadium and students lined up to pose with a limestone cat, this ridge held the kind of legend that sticks to a place even when its animals are gone. The Lenape told of a guardian spirit that wore the shape of an eastern cougar, vast and tawny, padding the ridgelines and keeping watch over the people below. In some tellings, the spirit answered the grief of a young woman named Nitany, or Nittany, whose forbidden love ended in blood. She called on the great power to remember him. The earth rose, and the ridge became a promise that protection could be made of stone. Settlers heard those echoes and folded them into their own frontier folklore. In the 1700s and early 1800s, real cougars still moved like shadows through Pennsylvania's woods, feared and admired in equal measure. Then the forests thinned, the rifles multiplied, and by the late 19th century, the eastern cougar was said to be gone, officially extinct, as far as the game wardens were concerned. The animal vanished, the idea did not. The lion remained as a presence you could feel without seeing, a rumor that patrolled the line between myth and memory. When the Farmers High School of Pennsylvania became Penn State, the mountain lingered as a compass point and a dare. Climb it and see the whole valley spread out like a topographic map come to life. In 1904, a student named H.D. Joe Mason looked at Princeton's tiger and realized his school needed something just as fierce, but ours, he thought, should be native, born of the ridge itself. He named it the Nittany Lion, and the campus found a mascot that wasn't borrowed from a jungle in someone else's story. This one lived here in two ways at once, as bone and blood memory, and as the spirit that legends braid into a landscape. The shrine came later, in 1942, carved in limestone and placed like an altar where students still go to lay hands on a paw before exams, weddings, big games, or the kind of days you want to count. The stone cat listens the way stone does, by staying, by letting the stories touch it and go. And yet the older tale keeps a pulse. Hikers on Mount Nittany talk about wind that roars like surf through oaks and pines, about a sudden hush at overlooks where the view snaps open and the campus looks small and temporary. On certain nights, when fog drapes the valley, someone will swear they heard a low, throaty sound that doesn't belong to deer or bobcat. The Pennsylvania Game Commission will tell you the cougar is gone, and they're probably right, but rumors walk on four quiet feet. What never left is the guardianship. When a quarry once threatened to bite into the ridge, students and locals made a human shield of petitions and protests. The Mount Nittany Conservancy formed in 1945 and has kept the ridge's spine intact, the trails clear, the legend fed with stewardship instead of speeches. Some historians argue Nittany might have been a real woman whose name was mythologized. Others say the tale is a romantic graft, stitched from nearby tribal stories. Both readings can be true in spirit. People anchor, meaning to land the way, roots grip, rock, and stories are the cords that hold generations steady. Stand at the Nittany Lion shrine at night, when the field lights dim and stars climb the ridge. Look east to where the mountain's shoulder lifts against the sky. You may see nothing but trees and stone, or you may feel what the old stories were trying to teach, that a place can watch over its people, that courage can be carved from what stands and endures. The mascot is modern, the guardian is older, the bond is the same, a promise that this valley is worth defending. From a mountain that guards its valley to a fortress that won't come when called, Western Pennsylvania asks you to hold two truths at once. Drive the bends of the Monongahela, and the river does what rivers do. It pretends nothing has changed. But somewhere along these banks, 19th century eyes swore they saw the bones of something immense, an earthwork larger and stranger than any nearby village, ringed and fortified, scarred by fire. They called it a fort, then time erased it. The people most likely to have raised such walls are the Monongahela, a culture that occupied this tri-state corner from roughly A.D. 1000 to 1635. Their villages were circular and palisaded, tight rings of houses around a central space, rebuilt on the same ground generation after generation, until the post holes stacked like a tree's growth rings in soil. They planted corn and beans, hunted deer, traded for shell and copper bright enough to carry stories far beyond the horizon. No written language, no stone monuments, just wood, earth, fire, and the habits of returning home. Late 1800s reports describe a site that didn't fit the usual pattern. Multiple concentric embankments, trenches that may have held water, and ash layers that looked like either battle or deliberate burning. Then the fort performed its disappearing act. Old maps disagreed about the exact bend. Rivers meandered. Rail lines chewed through banks. Early collectors pried artifacts loose and failed to write down where they'd found them. By the time professional archaeologists went looking with careful grids and notes, the landmark was rumor, and the rumor was a maze. Zoom out, and the mystery grows sharper. Across the region, excavations show Monongahela households anchoring themselves to place, rebuilding palisades over earlier palisades as if reaffirming a vow. In some layers, evidence of conflict rises. Thicker walls, more clustered storage pits, burned horizons. It's easy to imagine a moment when scattered communities pooled labor into something massive. A refuge, a rallying point, a last stand. Others propose the big enclosure began as ceremony, a seasonal gathering ground that later took on teeth when times grew hard. The two ideas don't cancel each other. They could be chapters of the same story. What ended the story is another tangle. The Monongahela vanished from the record by the early 1600s. Diseases may have run ahead of Europeans like sparks leaping a firebreak. Warfare pressed from multiple directions. Drought could have turned routine risk into calamity. Whatever the mix, the silence that follows is complete enough to feel like a closed door. No direct descendants name them in oral tradition with certainty, and so we read the soil instead. Modern searches keep trying to reopen the door. In the 1970 seconds, a farmer in Greene County turned up a dark ring of stains that mapped to a small palisaded village, not a fortress. Aerial photography teased faint geometries in floodplains that proved to be field patterns. LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar hinted at anomalies, then shrugged. Nothing matches those early grand descriptions. Perhaps the antiquarians exaggerated, as antiquarians sometimes did. Or perhaps they stood on a bank that no longer exists and described a reality we have since graded, flooded, and farmed into forgetting. Stand by the Monongahela at dusk, and you can perform the simple magic of archaeology. Close your eyes and let the present recede. Hear paddles knock softly against canoe gunwales. Smell wood smoke braided with river fog. Picture rings within rings, a wall stitched from trunks, watchfires pricking the dark. Whether the lost fort was a fortress, a sanctuary, or both, its most enduring trace may be this, a feeling that something important happened here and left only the outline where memory once stood. The river keeps its pace. The question keeps its edge. By now, the map of Pennsylvania feels less like counties and highways and more like a palimpsest, a page written over but never erased. Meadowcroft's alcove still breathes with ember smell if you stand quietly enough. Cornwall's sealed corridors hum with a geometry we haven't solved. Chickies Rock keeps talking in circles and hands at the water's edge. Mount Nittany shoulders its legend like a living creature. And the Monongahela's missing. Fortress draws a perfect ring in the air where Earth once stood. Each place asks the same question in a different accent. How old is our story, really, and how much of it have we mistaken for an ending when the sentence only folded around a bend? What makes these sites feel connected is not just age, but continuity. At Meadowcroft, the layers told us that families returned across 10,000 years, teaching skills by firelight in the same shelter where we now squint at charcoal and count seasons. In Cornwall, one tradition of working stone and flame was built directly on top of another, ironmaster over miner, factory over rumor, until the tunnels beneath began to look like a ledger of debts we still can't read. Along the Susquehanna, the petroglyphs stitched a corridor of meaning through water and time, a network of shrines that outlive their makers yet continue their appointment with sunrise and flood. Mount Nittany proves that guardianship isn't only a myth of animals, it's a practice of care repeated by hands that maintain trails, protect ridgelines, and keep a promise. And the Lost Fort reminds us that erasure is as much a force in history as survival. Some stories hide, some are hidden by us. Skepticism, too, belongs in this landscape. Meadowcroft's old dates were tested and retested before we allowed the timeline to move. Cornwall's odd chambers demand evidence, not just the warmth of a good ghost story. Chickies Rock's stranger carvings tempt us to import Vikings where none were needed. Discipline means letting the river speak a local tongue. Mount Nittany welcomes romance but stands on fact. A community chose to protect a ridge because stories taught them it mattered. Even the Lost Fort insists on humility, reminding us that a rumor can be a compass or a cul-de-sac depending on how we follow it. What endures beneath all these arguments is a feeling the way a place can press on you until you carry it away. It's in the hush that falls when a guide points to a fleck of ancient charcoal. It's in the way your footsteps echo inside a casting room and come back changed. It's in the slick shine of riverbed rock as you trace a spiral you shouldn't touch. It's in the sudden sense, on an overlook, that the wind knows an older name for courage. And it's in the quiet at a river bend where you can almost see rings within rings, as if the past were just a few shovels down. If there is a lesson here, and there is, it's that mystery is not the enemy of knowledge. Mystery is the invitation. It makes us ask better questions, take better care, return to the same places the way Meadowcroft's people did, the way the Monongahela rebuilt and rebuilt, the way students loop the ridge trail and come back with different eyes. Pennsylvania's deepest stories are not fossils, they are currents. Step into them lightly, let them shift your footing without knocking you off balance, and as you leave, remember that the ground remembers. The hills are older than our certainties. The river reads what we refuse. The tunnels keep their breath. The mountain keeps its watch. The fort keeps its shape in absence. And somewhere under fallen leaves, a small, black fleck of carbon keeps time for all of it. Smaller than a word, older than a book, stubborn as fire.